первую очередь я бы хотела поблагодарить Эдриана за тренинг, который Эдриан провел в нашем центре. Тренинг был посвящен профессиональной супервизии в семейной медиации и тренинг по работе с детьми в семейной медиации. Мы попросили Эдриана провести круглый стол, на котором мы смогли бы задать основные вопросы, которые, как нам кажется, были бы полезны для работы семейного медиатора. Надеемся и благодарим Эдриана за то, что он согласился ответить на наши вопросы. И вопрос первый, который я бы хотела спросить, касается супервизии в семейной медиации. Попросить Эдриана рассказать, насколько важна и необходима супервизионная поддержка семейного медиатора.
I think it's very important because when mediators are working what I call in the conflict zone with clients, sometimes they can't see what we call in England the wood for the trees. That is, they will have a certain perception of what is happening, but because they're dealing with two clients in conflict, there is a risk that they can sometimes either stray from the task, they can stray in terms of letting the boundaries slip, they can sometimes stray from the actual process and the principles of mediation. And in those situations, they need someone who is detached, who is not directly involved in the case, to listen to their account of what is going on in the mediation, but to offer a very objective view by asking questions to tease out from the mediator stuff that the mediator might not be making sense of. And if I was to give an example, I myself have experienced mediating and taking cases to my supervisor, who has helped me get a totally different view of what actually might be going on in the mediation room. And there have been times when unconsciously it's been drawn to my attention that unconsciously I have perhaps aligned myself with one of the clients. And the supervisors helped me look at the case critically to get the mediation back on track in a very, very balanced way so that both of the clients feel I am operating in both of their interests and helping me maintain the balance and impartiality.
Эдриан, в медиации мы не даем советов сторонам спора. Как поступает супервизор? Может ли он давать прямые рекомендации своему подопечному, особенно если сам медиатор об этом просит?
Absolutely. The role of a supervisor is quite distinct from that of a mediator. There are times when a mediator may stray, for example, may be working with a case when through supervision it becomes apparent that there are very, very serious risk issues arising. The mediator, in wanting to help the clients, may underestimate what else might be going on. So, for example, if a child protection issue has arisen, there may be a risk that the mediator is forgetting the seriousness of that and might decide to plough on or carry on with the mediation. And the supervisor may need to discuss with the mediator, listen to what's going on in the case, and then say, in view of what is being alleged, I'm going to ask you, will you please consider closing the case down? If the mediator was to actually say, well, no, I still want to work with this case, I may have to be a little bit ruthless and say, I am not going to support you in running this case. I'm going to insist that you close it down. And based on what you've heard, you must report this to the social services. In the event that the mediator chose not to take what I'm telling them to do, then I may have to warn them that I will not have any responsibility for the way they're conducting that case. And if they continue to go down a route that I think is putting a child at risk, then I may have to withdraw from being their supervisor and ultimately may need to report them to their professional body. It's what we call tough love. It's protecting the mediator as well in terms of their future professional development. It's also vitally protecting a possible child being at risk. There are other situations where a mediator may be explaining a case to me that is starting to hit a major impasse. Let's say, for example, that the mediator is a male mediator and there are issues arising in the case where I think they are straying from being impartial and they may be starting to align with perhaps the male party or indeed even the female party. And I will be saying to them, based on what you're telling me, you know that you have built into your contract for mediation with the clients that you can adjust your model of mediation. And I'm going to insist that you consider bringing in a mediator of the opposite gender who can help you restore the balance to encourage the clients to feel that they are actually being treated in an appropriate way, where both their interests are being considered. And those are really just two examples, but I think it demonstrates that a supervisor does have the power and the ability to say, firstly, this is my advice, but if you choose not to take it, then I would be deeply concerned how this case is going to go. And I may have to direct you now to consider bringing someone else in. If I think it's serious enough and the mediator chooses not to take that advice, again, I may have to say, this could compromise our relationship in terms of me supporting you and being your supervisor.
Эдриан, учитывая всю огромную ответственность, которая лежит на супервизоре, как становится квалифицированным супервизором, чтобы мочь предоставлять весь этот комплекс огромных услуг, которые требуются для медиатора?
It's crucial that a supervisor has considerable experience of working with a whole range of cases. It's equally crucial that they are in supervision themselves or have a supervisor they themselves can also go to. And in many ways, we'd be expecting a supervisor not just to have a very, very large knowledge base, but to have proven themselves that they have actually helped clients truly reach agreements that have been upheld, the clients have felt. In England, what we look for to become a supervisor is an individual that's been proven by producing a number of cases that have reached full agreement with the clients. We'd expect a supervisor to have a minimum of 2 years initial foundation training mediation experience, to have worked with a substantive number of cases, and to have become accredited by their training body. That is the absolute ideal. In many ways, they've been judged and tested by their peers. They would additionally have to have attended a minimum of a 2 days course on what it is to become a supervisor. That is to have specific training in the supervision of family mediators.
Эдриан, во время вашего тренинга по работе с детьми в семейной медиации мы много внимания уделили вопросу прямого консультирования детей в процессе семейной медиации. Могли бы вы рассказать для наших семейных медиаторов, насколько это важный, сложный и необходимый процесс семейной медиации?
I think it's vitally important. There are certain cases that almost scream out for child consultation. I'll give an example here. There are many situations where the clients are way apart emotionally. They're in a very, very high conflict situation. And in fairness to the clients, they're trying to deal with their own hurt, their own anger, their own emotion. And in doing so, they often lose the focus of their child. And the role of the child consultant is to get alongside the child so that the child has a very, very clear voice, and that what the child feels is important for their parents to hear can be fed back to the parents in a session where there is an absolute emphasis on what the child's experiences are and what the child's hopes and concerns may be. My experience is it can galvanise parents and makes them realise that they have lost their own parenting focus in many ways, partly because they're dealing with their hurt, their anger, as I mentioned. And it's not for the child consultant to berate the parents. It's recognising that they're in a bad place. But the parents can then hear what it is that their child's going through. And my experiences are that the parents are often somewhat shocked at what they're hearing. If I give an example of a situation, and that is where a young lad who was 14 years old actually explained to me in a confidential session, and I always assure the child that what is being discussed is confidential between myself as a child consultant and that child, and I will only feed back exactly what that child, or young person perhaps I should say, wishes me to do. And in this particular example, the 14-year-old made it clear that he loved both of his parents, but he had a deep bond of affection with his mother, who he'd been residing with for a number of years. The father he hadn't seen for a few years. And the reason he hadn't seen the father was the father had let him down on many occasions in the past. What came out of the discussion was that the son said, "I need my father to help me become the man I need to be. I need my father's guidance. I need his spiritual guidance as much as anything, because I wish to go to the religious house that my father attends. At the moment I go to another religious house with an uncle, but I crave for the day that I can be with my father as well." He also wanted me to report back to his mother that he didn't really wish to be reminded on a weekly basis how awful his father had been to his mother. He had witnessed as a young boy his mother being thrown down the stairs by the father and suffering quite horrific injuries. She was now physically healed, quite likely still mentally scarred, emotionally scarred. And what he said, he'd thought it through very carefully, that if his father could initiate contact by writing him a letter and then starting to have some telephone conversations with him over a period of weeks and then months, and if he felt the father was upholding that, then he felt he would be in a position to move forward and giving his father another chance to actually start meeting him. He wished me to feed that back, and the father acknowledged the number of times he'd let his son down, and he had huge impact when he realised he wasn't providing his son with the spiritual and emotional guidance he needed. The son also balanced it by saying, "But as much as I love my mother and she's always been there for me, I would like her to understand that I don't wish to keep being reminded of this awful hurt. The images will never go from my mind, but I don't really want her just to keep reminding me, because sometimes I feel it may also be getting in the way of me trying my part," that's the young lad's part, of getting to know his father. And when I fed that back to both of them, I fed back to the father first. As I say, the father acknowledged and said he was willing to go along with the structure and the process that his son would like. When I fed back to his mother, she actually screamed. And she said, "Oh my gosh, I have been a terrible mother." And I said, "You haven't been a terrible mother. He's just saying this is what he'd like, not to be reminded." And she thought about it and acknowledged, hadn't quite realised the impact that had been having. 6 months later, the mediator in the particular case, because the consultation had been contracted out, reported that the father had done just as the son had requested, and was now having contact, and it was going well, and the mother no longer verbally reminded the son of her awful experience.
Эдриан, как вы считаете, может ли медиатор, который не имеет психологического образования, работать с детьми в медиации?
Absolutely. We've got experience in England of a number of people that come from disciplines other than psychology or psychotherapy, for instance. Family lawyers, there are individuals that have come from many other backgrounds who have proven themselves by doing 2 days child consultation training and then doing some very, very good child consultations. The key bit is, one, having a natural empathy and genuine interest in a child or in children. Also understanding about child development, not at a deep level that perhaps a child psychologist would have, but being a good human being able to get alongside a child, and I think the emphasis is getting alongside, not subjecting them to a formal interview. And so yes, we see many mediators coming from a variety of backgrounds who've shown themselves to be more than competent in being very effective child consultants.
Эдриан, вы уже говорили немножечко о роли конфиденциальности в работе с детьми. Что еще нужно учитывать, чтобы правильно провести вот эту консультационную встречу с ребенком и с соблюдением конфиденциальности передать всю информацию родителям?
Confidentiality for the child is paramount. It needs to be explained very carefully in language in which the child will understand. In essence, the child should have been informed by the parents that the consultation is going to be taking place. It's subject to the child wishing to come for the consultation. And the child at that stage should have heard from the parents that they're going to have an opportunity to have a private discussion with the child consultant. As a child consultant, it's vital that I demonstrate to that child that I'm going to absolutely uphold the confidentiality. So, for example, I will, after having my discussion with the child and listening to them, I will be flip charting exactly the responses that they are giving me that they'd like me to consider taking back to the parents. I place it on a flip chart and then I go through it very, very carefully as to what would be the implications, do you think? How would your parents receive this feedback? And I give the child time to think through each of the responses that I've written up. Once they've thought it through, I will then invite them to be clear with me what exactly would they like me to take back. And then I'll put a line through certain things that I may put up on the flip chart because the child is saying, Adrian, perhaps I wouldn't like you to put that back to my parents. I then take a note of what the child wishes me to feedback, double checking they are sure this is what they want me to do. And I'll then destroy the original flip chart. The reason for that is it gives me the absolute focus of exactly what the child's given me permission to let the parents know. And from my experience, children check out with their parents. What did Adrian say? And the parents tell them. And for the child, that gives reassurance that they can trust an adult in the child consultation process. And for me, it's the integrity of that process. Trust for children is so vitally important.
Эдриан, учитывая то, что семейный медиатор в процессе семейной медиации работает с несколькими аспектами семейной медиации, включая имущественные вопросы, финансовое содержание, работа с детьми в процессе семейной медиации, я бы хотела у вас уточнить, на ваш взгляд, какими характеристиками, личными качествами должен обладать семейный медиатор?
Qualities of a mediator, there are many, but I'm going to touch on some of the key ones. And I think some of the key qualities are that they can maintain integrity of the process, they can actually manage the process in a balanced way. That they are proactive, they're not passive. They don't just let clients have circular arguments, they intervene, they're willing to enter into the conflict and be maybe quite tough with each of the clients to keep a focus, but to move the process forward in a positive way. That does require the qualities of being assertive, being professional, and dare I say, it's also having a degree of humility, warmth, and a genuine interest in clients, in the very clients they're working with. Even though they may be working with clients that may be coming across in perhaps an unpleasant way towards each other, or indeed putting a mediator on the spot, trying to get a mediator to be convinced that what the client is saying is absolutely right and what the other person is saying is absolutely wrong. It's maintaining that absolute balance of impartiality, but being prepared to ask some tough questions, drawing from on a whole range of skills. And so the qualities actually involve having an integrated understanding of what I would call at least 15 key skills, from the perceptiveness of understanding, reading body language, but being a little bit careful about that, but also being aware perhaps of their own body language. So it's very easy to slip. The wry smile to a comment may be picked up by a client who thinks, have you strayed? Have you started supporting the other side? But I think it's very much one of knowing how to intervene, but in moving the process forward. If, for example, a client is saying, tell him I don't want him to do this, or tell her I don't want her to do this, I will say, well, let's rephrase this. What is it you would like the other party to do? And when I've had a response, can I just put you on hold and go to the other person saying, what would you like the other party to do? And in a sense, I think a quality has to be one of being prepared to be interventionist, not passive, and being prepared to ask quite tough questions. And in many ways, I think a quality, whilst we're trying to inject a degree of warmth, at the same time, we're not paid necessarily to be liked by our clients. And that might sound rather hard, but it is to actually help them move forward. I think another quality is perhaps having some understanding of some of the neuro-linguistic programming principles, and also a range of other elements that we tend to draw from the social sciences. For instance, it may be that the mediator, well not maybe, I would say it's a definite, not only should have very good active listening skills, i.e. listening, the oral element to listening, but recognising that a number of clients may be less gifted at listening, but may, in a way, have a greater appreciation of looking at visual material. And so I think it's also about the mediator recognising that and not just having, in a sense, structured and tough questions of the clients, but also putting things up in a pictorial way for those clients that may be more visual. I think also it's drawing on, say, elements of transactional analysis. That is, they're not going to analyse those clients, but they may just draw to the attention of the clients that from time to time they may be perceived to be operating in a slightly different ego state. For instance, there will be times when I've got to be the controlling parent, because I've got to keep the clients fixed to the process. And I may have to be quite tough about that and remind them of the contract of mediation that they have signed, the principles of mediation that we're going to uphold. Whilst at the same time, working in a parallel way, I've also been a bit of a nurturing parent, because both those clients may need looking after. Give an example. Two clients are in the room, and one may be experiencing a great deal of pain and hurt because they have perceived they've been abandoned by the other party. The other party may be in a very different place, may be punching the air with delight that they're getting out of this relationship, but nevertheless may still be hurting in their own way, but might be coming across to me as a little bit clinical and saying, Adrian, can't we just move this process on? And I have to remind them that I'm there for both of them. And it may be that they're both feeling insecure, and that's where we start getting the balance. Another important quality, I believe, is actually having a pretty thorough understanding of family law. Not to provide advice, but to be able to give clients appropriate information so that they can be guided, that their discussions have to stay really within the parameters of the family law, so that if they are looking to get a court endorsement, ultimately, of their agreement, and many clients don't necessarily settle in children matters, but those that do, they need to know that what they're proposing would come within the parameters or the range that a judge would approve. If I don't provide that information to the clients, the chance is they could have spent money with me, they go off to the court with their agreement, only to find that that agreement is being thrown back at them. And they could understandably be quite angry with me for not having pointed out how the courts tend to approach these matters.
Эдриан, вопрос снова касается привлечения детей в медиацию. На программе, которую мы прошли с вами, мы поняли, насколько это полезный инструмент, насколько это может помочь медиации и семье, которая находится в сложной ситуации жизненной. Но я могу предположить, что мало кто из наших медиаторов до этого с этим работал. И когда начинаешь что-то новое, важно, наверное, уверенность может придать и понимание первых шагов. Вот с чего нужно начинать медиатору, если он в медиации принял решение работать с ребенком?
Well, I think firstly a child consultant would need to actually have a couple of days training minimum, and they've got to have natural empathy for children, understand a bit about child development. Ideally, and certainly it happens in England, all child consultants have to be police checked at an enhanced level. And that is just to ensure that we actually get child consultants in that won't prey on children in an inappropriate way. But the stages, let's assume the child consultant has been trained. The stages are very much engaging with the parents initially, assessing suitability. Is this any consultation? Is this something the parents can do? Or is it really, does it need to be handled by a professional like a child consultant? So it's engaging with the parents and explaining the purpose of child's consultation and how it can work. The next stage is then preparing the parents, getting them to consider how they need to engage with their child. to explain that they may well be consulted. So it's getting the parents to actually start putting some consideration in how this is going to be handled. The very next stage would then be getting them to not just think about themselves and how they may react to sometimes hearing some stuff that might be difficult, but also what effect it could have on the child coming to a child consultation. Are there any issues that the child consultant needs to be aware of? In other words, they need to have a pretty full picture of the child, what their interests, hobbies may be, who else may be important in their lives, and also whether that child is indeed going to benefit. Are they mature enough, perhaps, for consultation? Which is why I tend to work with children 10 years and above. But others who are more skilled could work perhaps with younger ones. The very next stage would be asking the parents to sign consent forms. We need the signatures on a form, a little bit like we do with the agreement to mediate. We need the client's signatures on that they truly understand the process they're going into. We also need to be sure that the parents are giving the child consultant authority to see the child. So we have to make sure we've got that on file. And then we'd be moving to sending a letter to the child or working out what is the best way that the child could be contacted so there is at least some initial contact from the child consultant and that the parents have also explained to the child what is going to happen. The next stage would be actually meeting the child, having the consultation. And then the final stage would be feeding back to the parents what that child has given permission to feed back.
Эдриан, сейчас количество браков, где муж с одной стороны и жена с другой стороны, все время растет, и количество, соответственно, разводов тоже увеличивается. Сейчас многие страны обращают внимание на ситуацию, когда необходимо защитить права ребенка и каким-то образом с помощью медиации разрешить вот эти конфликты между родителями, чтобы правильно обеспечить ребенку возможность адекватного роста и с учетом его контактов с обоими родителями. Какова роль вот этих вот кросс-культурных аспектов, как это учитывается в медиации?
This is a really important development in the postmodern world. We have a huge movement of peoples across borders, and it's what I would call almost binational mediation. Cross-cultural is naturally another term. And this is where parents at one end of the continuum may be considering that there is going to be a separation and that one of the parents may wish to move to another jurisdiction and perhaps take the children with them. In those situations, they're in a sense using a mediator to take us out. They're perhaps not in high conflict, they're just wondering what should they consider. And there's a whole range of considerations there through to where may the child reside, what sort of contact arrangements they think they can structure. Let's look at maybe any potential health issues, educational issues. What about the impact on those children of perhaps missing a set of grandparents or indeed the extended family per se? Moving along the continuum, we will have parents that are in conflict. And I think the role of the mediator there is to really help them consider and understand the implications that there may be for the child, keeping the child focused whilst recognising that this is possibly going to happen. But ideally, if it does happen, it is consensual with the parents. They have given it quite a bit of thought. Moving further on the continuum, of course, are those very, very difficult cases where a situation has arisen that there's been an abduction. And of course we have regard to the Hague Convention and all those countries that may be signed up to that convention. For the mediator in those situations, they'd have to have a pretty good understanding of the legislation of the jurisdictions. And they'd have to be prepared to flag up where those clients may well need legal advice. But I think this is going to be a growing area. Now, the other thing that the mediator has to consider, particularly if the cultures are going to be fundamentally different, or indeed, say, the faiths within those cultures are going to be fundamentally different. For example, there may be someone from the Ukraine who has married someone, say, from an Asian country, and they have fundamentally different religions. The question I think we have to start asking ourselves is, does the mediator have to be an expert? That is, good grounding in understanding both of those cultures. Or should the mediator be what we call a curious explorer and be prepared to tease out from the parents an understanding which will help the mediator make sense of some of their differences? But I think it's a crucial area that we're going to see more and more of these cases. And of course, it's not just in marriages, it's also where people have lived together but not formalised the relationship. There's clear evidence that in many, many cases, mediators can do some absolutely fabulous work. But it also then starts raising other questions, such as who should the mediator be? For many, many parties, they're quite content to have a mediator working on the case. But there may be some situations where one of the parties might feel marginalised if they believe the mediator is from the country of origin of one of the parties and may, for example, not understand the culture of the other party. And it perhaps raises an issue of whether there's scope for there to be two mediators, one from each jurisdiction. But that can be incredibly expensive and quite difficult to arrange. But I think we're now on the cusp of seeing, and certainly the experiences in England and other jurisdictions, are that this is a growing area and it does need very, very careful consideration. We also have to consider where would be the appropriate place for the mediation. And in matters where there has already been an abduction, or it could also be termed as a kidnap, to what extent do matters need to be, any outstanding criminal matters, for instance, need to have been already dealt with, so that a finding of fact, or indeed a court outcome, has already been agreed. Sometimes it's very, very hard for mediators to work in cases and truly understand to what extent both participants are appropriately motivated to engage in discussions around the conflict. If, for instance, there are outstanding court proceedings against one party, the question is that party motivated truly to mediate, or are they only doing it to have some influence on a final court outcome? Many, many questions still perhaps to be explored and indeed answered in these binational situations. But from experience, and I have to say, I tend not to deal with the very tough cases. There are mediators that do feel sufficiently adept and skilled to do with kidnap and abduction cases. But in a great many cases, I think we can still operate as we normally would as family mediators, because the client's their conflict is not quite so positional or hardened.
Эдриан, еще раз благодарю за предоставленную возможность задать вам вопросы, которые важны для нашего медиаторского сообщества, особенно семейных медиаторов, так как в нашей стране медиация в целом только начинает развиваться, семейная медиация в том числе. И благодарю за ваш приезд в нашу страну, за ваше желание поделиться своим опытом, который достаточно огромен для нас и достаточно полезен, чтобы мы могли теперь воплощать все то, что вы передали нам в нашей стране. Спасибо большое.
I thank you for that. I mean, it's been an amazing experience and a very interesting journey with you all. Whenever I do training, I am still learning. And from each of you, I've learned much. I've learned much about not just the culture of Ukraine, but also about the cultures of some of the other participants. I've learned a lot about myself as well in doing the training, and it helps me reprocess and reconsider my thinking. My thinking, in many ways, might sound strange, is almost constantly changing and being adapted. And the warmth that I got, I know at times I could be a little bit tough in the sessions, trying to ensure that people actually went through what I felt were the required learnings. But the participation was fabulous. It was helped immensely by being well supported in terms of all the translations, the interpretations, the presentations. It was a whole team approach here, from reception to the IT support. Everything was really good. So it made me feel very, very humble. And I think, as you realised when I was having some thanks at the end, it brought tears to my eyes, because I thought this truly has been a very uplifting and quite an emotional experience at times. Huge learning went on in the group. I saw people move from being not sure about this to, oh gosh, there's a lot to get through. But I saw real movement on the successive days of training. I saw an integration of the theoretical aspects and the sharing of experiences. It came out in the role plays. And that's really where the true learning, I think, went on. It was where individuals were being put into role, feeling what it was like to step into the shoes of the clients, seeing how different mediators had different styles and different approaches, having fabulous feedback from each other, giving critique, sometimes not pulling punches, but people took on board what was being fed back. The roles played by the observers in giving some good critique. And overall, it was just a pretty amazing experience. And I have 100% confidence that not only have you already got established stars here, mediating, but you have emerging stars developing. I think the more that people work together and share experiences, the more they will take the learning forward. And I just commend you all, because you have a centre of excellence here, and it's going to grow. You're going to attract much more government interest, much more multidisciplinary interest from the social sciences, from lawyers. And I'd love to see, over a period of time, how you take things forward. You will be successful. You already are, but you will become even more successful. And most of that success will be down to yourselves.